What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Weisz.
Dr. Jeremy Weisz here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different with Bill Harper. And Bill, I always like to point out, other episodes people should check out of the podcast. We had Andy Crestadina of Orbit Media Studios. Check it out. It was a great episode. Ralph Burns of Tier 11 and Jason Swank's episode. He talks about how he buys agencies and what he looks for. So check all of those out on InspiredInsider.com. And the episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect their Dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We help you run your podcast. For me, Bill, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way to do that than to profile the people and the companies I most admire and have them on my podcast over the past decade. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. Both John and I have been doing it for over a decade now, which is not compared to how long Bill has been in the agency world, but we're gonna dig deep into that. And today I'm excited to introduce Bill Harper. He's founder and chief creative officer of WM Harper, which is a strategic branding agency. Its headquarters is in Raleigh, North Carolina, but he does hail from Chicagoland area. And Bill's focus is on the idea of dominatitude, which is attitude. How do you pronounce it? Dominatitude. And it's helping business not just win, but to dominate their respective categories. And the agency focuses on brands in need of transformation, helping them through transition from their awkward stages back to center stage. And I'm going to share my screen in a little bit and show Bill's website, because you have to go there and poke around because he has pictures of me from high school. No, I'm just kidding. It's wmharper.com, and you'll see what I mean when you go there. And Bill and his team helped Breast Cancer Index. We're going to dig deep in what he did there to grow from 35 million top line revenue to exit at 230 million in just 18 months. And a goal they reached a full year ahead of schedule. I mean, some people never reach that at all. Bill, and thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
And so just tell people a little bit more about, WM Harper and what you do.
Yeah. So our big thing is helping companies that have hit a plateau. Challenger brands is kind of the term everybody likes to play around with, but companies that haven't quite hit their full potential goal to figure out how to get to that next level. And so we really focus on companies that have a big, aggressive growth goal that are having a hard time figuring out how to get to that place. And if they're willing to embrace a change in the way that they think about the relevant messaging that they create on behalf of their consuming audience, whether it's whatever C word they like, customers or clients or consumers or whatever, then we sit down and we help them create a path forward that makes some sense and helps them to get that scale.
What companies, and so I'm sure if you are listening to the audio and you watch the video, you're seeing Bill's website up right now, and it's fantastic. What kind of companies are attracted to this? At what point did you figure out this is your messaging? Brands go through awkward phases. We get them back on track again.
Honestly, it's because it's who we like to work with. So I cut my teeth working on some of the brands that, you get very excited about when you're coming out of school, right? Like Anheuser-Busch and Blockbuster. Now I'm dating myself, and Enterprise Rent-A-Car and all that. And I loved them. They were a lot of fun, and I learned a ton in working with them. But what I also learned was that you couldn't have as big of an influence on how to change them. They were really focused on maintaining their position or, going from number 3 to number 2 or from number 2 to number 1. Like this was what kept them up at night, right? And so it was a lot of that kind of positioning. And what we really focused on and what I kind of fell in love with as I progressed in my career was helping companies that had billion-dollar potential, but were stuck in multi-million-dollar universes. And most of the time, the kinds of things that they were doing really lent themselves to the same strategies that those bigger players had figured out, but they hadn't figured out how to implement it yet. And we're really good at that. So kind of, the way we think about it is, as you've got here, emerging brands, declining brands, challenger brands, and investor brands. And the thing we're looking for is that like $25 million to $250 million company that wants to add a zero. And that's really the sweet spot that we play in. It's a lot of fun.
We're going to walk through some examples because I'd love to hear how you think about this and what you do, and specifically with Delso luggage.
Yeah, sure.
Like, talk about when they came to you, what were they looking for? Where were they at? And what'd you do?
Yeah, so Delso was a really interesting study. A French luggage manufacturer, they were in the entry-level side of the world. I kind of jokingly referred with the president that they were Taco Bell pricing, all right? It was like $79.99 and $119 for their base package things. And they had really good distribution, and they were incredibly well-known in Europe and Asia, but they really didn't do well as well as they would like in the United States. And if you take a look at the marketing back then, it was a lot of the stuff that you see that's happening, unfortunately, in the category now. It was lots of price points and things about ballistic nylon and self-healing zippers and skid plates and four-wheel drive. And it was like all the same parody stuff that everybody else was talking about. We had Delso about a decade or just a little over. And at the time, it was 2003, and the impact from 9/11 was still being pretty profoundly felt. And when we went to go interview consumers and do our research, we kept hearing this really interesting comment back. Everybody kept saying, travel's become a drag. It's become a drag. It's become a drag. And we really kind of tucked that into the back of our brain. And I was walking on the floor one day, and President David Bieber at the time was showing me a product that they were about to launch called helium. And I was asking him about it. And he said, helium, it's 22% lighter, but has the same structural rigidity as everybody else. And I said, well, like, what does that mean? And he goes, well, usually about a pair of shoes and some pants. And I was like, okay, well, if you're charged $50, every time your bag is a little heavy, then this would be something. And he said, I can see the fire in your eye. He said, but Europe's tried it. Samsonite's tried it. Nobody can really make it work. I don't think people really care about lightweight as a concept. He said, but if you can show me one thing, and it's good that you stopped there because that's the one that launched it all. He said, if you can show me one idea that I don't hate, I'll let you run it for a year and we'll see what happens. That was kind of the thing. And so I came back to him and I said, look, I think I see an opportunity for you guys to really own this lightweight thing. And here's what we'd like to do. So this first ad that I brought to him that was basically a comp was a woman walking through wet cement where she leaves tracks and the bag doesn't. We got rid of all that feature and benefit stuff. And instead, we just replaced it with this little tag that you can still find on most of the products that are sold in the US today that just says lightweight and has a little feather on it. From this ad, we had an 86% increase in sales year one, another 72% year two, and an incredible 837% sales increase over a 6-year window. This completely changed the way that the US was seen. And we brought them up to equal unaided awareness to Tumi, which was third in the market in under 2 years. So it was really pretty amazing. But the funny thing about it, and nothing ever came from it, was really funny. I got a phone call one day from a woman, and she said, I'm looking for the agency who came up with the Delso ad with the woman walking through wet cement. And I said, well, you found us. That's it. She said, I'm with American Standard, the toilet manufacturer. She said, my boss came in and said, go find out who did this. It was the strangest call ever, but it was a real compliment, right? Like, here's this massive toilet manufacturer.
How do they track you down?
What's that?
How do they even track you down?
I have no idea. I guess she took the ad and must have done some kind of research, but it was really funny. So this assistant called me this one day. And again, it was a really funny story because nothing ever came from it. But I was like, yes, that's us. We did it. This is how it happened. She asked me a couple of questions and then it disappeared. But so our ad was very effective in a number of different ways.
Bill, I love to hear I love this. And there's a lot of years of experience and time, energy, effort that goes into this. What does the brainstorming process look like to get to this, right? What we see here with if people are looking at the screen, it's a a lady walking through wet cement. She's wheeling her, suitcase in one hand, but that's not making any marks in the wet cement, but her feet are.
So I think the thing that you're looking for, at least what we look for, is tension. Nobody cares about the tech of it. They just don't, right? Because it's too similar to what everybody else is. So if you're finding in the research, and that's why research is such a critical part of our process, you're looking for the thing that they are heavily emotionally engaged with. And in this instance, it was, travel had really changed. People used to look forward to it and save up for it, and they would get dressed up to go on the plane, and like it was a big family event, or something that they really looked forward to. And it had been changed now to something that was much more mundane and was not fun and the rest of it. And so this idea of sort of taking the lug out of luggage really like Legoed very nicely with their existing frustration. And so it wasn't really about the product, which I think is what's so hard for most brands to recognize. It's not about the product. It's about how the product leaves the consumer in a better emotional state. And so once you find what the consumer values, what they are either striving for or moving away from, then you've got something to play with. And that's the same playbook that every major brand plays from. I think it's a surprise that so few brands have sort of locked on to that insight, but once they do, their growth is significant.
Another company, I wanted to choose a few that were just far from each other, right? And there was another one that is the breast cancer index. So talk about them and how did they come to you and what did you do with them?
Now, so BCI was a completely different animal, right? So Delso is a 8-year buy cycle and a durable good and all the rest of it. Breast cancer index was incredibly niche. So their whole thing is they are a test for women with HR positive breast cancer to determine whether they will benefit from the second 5-year regimen of endocrine therapy. And the simple fact is that 95% of women don't. So it's not like 3% or 5%, 95% of women don't benefit from this. So this test really told two things. Number one, are you going to benefit from this therapy? And number two, are you likely or unlikely to have a recurrence of the cancer in the first place? And so this became a really, really interesting, much more than interesting. Let me back up for half a second. Oncologists were really struggling, and the reason that they were is because they didn't have a definitive test. And as such, they were prescribing this thing that they knew darn well wasn't helping, but there was no way to tell who it would and who it wouldn't. And so the safer bet was to make sure that everybody had the best opportunity by continuing the second 5-year regimen. So they were really looking for something. This is the first genomic test of its kind that could definitively say whether somebody would benefit or not. And that was a massive, massive plus for those oncologists. What we did, though, in here that was different, as you're seeing in the work, is oncologists are maybe some of the most targeted human beings on the planet, right? Everybody has something new that they want them to be aware of. And so we really needed a way to get oncologists' attention beyond just the standard path. And what we chose to do here strategically was we empowered and really activated the support groups surrounding cancer patients and the cancer patients themselves by giving them the information that they needed to begin the discussion with their oncologist. So we literally gave them a PDF that helped them to go to their oncologist and say, I saw this thing in the media and I think it might be for me. Can you answer these questions for me to see whether or not it would be a good fit? And in doing that, we caused a tremendous spike in engagement. And that was really what they wanted. So they came to us with a top line revenue of just about 35 million with the ask that we help them achieve a valuation or an exit of 250 million within a 3-year window. And as luck has it, we were able to help them reach 230 million in just over 18 months. And so it was a huge success for them, and really a huge success for us as well.
You said, you reached some of the oncologists through individuals. What are some of the channels you deployed to reach those individuals?
So there were a number of things that we did. We did influencer marketing. We did digital marketing. We created. We were part of their trade shows, which helped on one side, but then there was some event marketing that happened as well to generate interest. But a lot of this actually leaned to social. And the reason why is because this is such a shared, cancer has become such a shared occurrence. It's not quite the taboo thing that it was 20 years ago. This has affected so many families now. And we really found that the social aspect was a huge way to begin the conversation. And so once we had engaged with some people who had experience of their own that they were willing to share, and those influencers became a part of the discussion. And we picked, I think it was 15 across the country that we really invited in and made ambassadors on behalf of the brand. Then we went into target markets and we made the brand visible, right? So we are of the belief that nobody buys from brands that they're not familiar with. And so we needed to put a face on the company that was in support of the stories that were being told by the influencers. And several of those influencers had either heard of the brand or had friends or family that had been a part of the BCI process. And so that brought to light a lot of support in those stories being something that was a direct experience or close to a direct experience.
Bill, you've been doing this in the agency world for a minute, for a little while now. Yeah. I don't want to age you, but just give me a brief overview of your journey. Like, where did you start, and then some of the places along the way to current? And I know there's a bunch of companies, but just if we were to do a kind of a fast forward reel through your career, what were some of the stopping points?
I think DMB&B was certainly the place where I got my real exposure, and that was their flagship office in St. Louis, which was a phenomenal experience. Oddly enough, they also, coming out of that, I think there were 350 or 400 people at that office. And I wound up taking a role working on Denny's, which was down in Greenville, South Carolina, at one of their satellite offices, and went from all of those people down to about 20. And that was my real first taste of how impactful a small team could be. So I see the DMB&B experience as being one of the most profound in terms of my personal education and growth in the career. And then along the way, I found, working at Henderson, which was also in South Carolina, they had Michelin and Ryobi and Peerless and a number of other things. And I was, in some cases, working in a support role on some of those, and in some working alongside people who were working on it, but having a front row seat to that team, which at the time was, I think, about 70 or so people. And that was really further reinforcing the impact that could be had on those brands. And so as I progressed in my career, what I found was the teams kept getting smaller because we had greater impact on them, which was a lot of fun. And then one day, my first business partner, who I was trying to hire at an agency where I was working, called me and said, "Actually, I think you'd be really good helping me run this company. Why don't you come do it?" And ultimately, I wound up doing just that. And that experience really put me on a path that I haven't strayed from since. So
was that at Rooftop Communications, or what? Which one?
No, actually, that was prior to that. It was Underground Advertising. And so Underground was the first ownership experience. And then after we sold Underground, I did some consulting, and then I had an agency, and then I sold it, and then I did consulting. And then, so I've sort of been back and forth between those two models. But the truth is, I think once you've been bitten by the ownership bug, it's practically impossible to go back. It's just, it's too much fun.
Talk about some of the selling of the companies. What lessons did you learn? What things do you look back that maybe you wish you would have done differently?
I think when you're young, at least this was the case for me, it was much more about the work than it was the company itself in terms of its value. And so there was a belief on the front end that our company, because it was very creative forward and very strategically creative and the rest of it, that would somehow be a much bigger impact in terms of its value than it was. At the end of the day, it truly comes down to not being involved and being able to have a machine that can operate independently of you. And that requires that you have a solid understanding of who you're working with and a solid process that allows you to hire the right kinds of people to be valuing the things the same way that you are. So that transition, which certainly did not happen overnight, has really, I think, been the biggest thing. It wasn't that any of the sales or sales to partners as I exited certain companies were in and of themselves specifically profound. I think the thing that was really instrumental in all of it was learning how other people looked at the company's value from the outside, and the things that were most important to me weren't always the things that were the most important to them, and being able to bring those two things together.
What would be an example of that? What was something that was important to you, wasn't important to them, or vice versa?
I think the biggest thing is I didn't realize in the early stages just how critical not being involved was. I think, I heard somebody say this not long ago, and shoot, I wish I could remember who it was that told it to me, because it was such a beautiful sentiment. But they said, when you start a company, you wear all the hats. And if you do it right, you give them all away. And I think that there are so many leaders that feel that knee-jerk reaction or dependence of being involved as though it's suddenly going to go off the rails without them. And I think at the end of the day, that's really indicative of someone who isn't trying to build a company as much as they are trying to protect their hobby or the thing that the lifestyle that they really like. If you're trying to grow a company for scale, and if you want to be able to truly have something that's valuation is going to be as high as possible, it needs to be able to operate independent of you.
What was the evolution of the different services you offered as you had different companies and sold them?
All of that directly tied back to which ones made the greatest impact. And I'll give you a great example. We used to do website development, backend, and we stopped. And the reason that we stopped is because it became a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365-day a year requirement that somebody gets in the back end and makes a mistake, as some clients do, and you're getting a panic phone call at 11 o'clock at night going, oh my God, I just crashed the website. I have no idea what to do. There are a number of teams that are infinitely better set up than a branding agency is to be able to manage that. And so we spent about 4 years developing the sites that we created on the front end, the user experiences and the design, so that we knew exactly what we could do with them. And that education was critical from the standpoint of knowing how and where we could bend and flex the design to be able to work with platforms. So I wouldn't have traded it for anything. But I think that's a great example of, was that really a larger scale benefit to them? No, the partnerships that were able to scale according to need was a far more significant value to them. So I think us really honing down on the things that we do best, which is that, front end leadership alignment, that consumer insights piece, and then using that alignment between the insights that we gather and what it is that's so important to that company as the foundation that we use to go swinging for the fences in terms of creating a point of differentiation and unique voice in the category, was really where the greatest value came to each of our clients. And as such, we structured ourselves around it.
Bill, you've grown several agencies at this point. I'd love to hear some of the key hires as you grew. And it could be with, WM Harper, or anyone or any of the other companies. What were some of the key hires as you grew from a small team to a larger team?
I'll tell you, actually, I think if you don't mind, there's a better question to answer with that. And it was the thing that I learned at this company that I didn't know before. And that was, I used to hire for talent almost exclusively. And I was always struck by how hard it was to create culture when I had such great talent. And it was a real surprise to me. This time around, however, we did it differently. We hired everybody. Of course, you had to have the talent to be at the table, but the deciding factor was values, personal values. For instance, I don't hire people that are running away from something. I hire people that are running to something. I no longer expect anybody to find their joy in my dream. I openly embrace and trumpet the dream that they are chasing on their own behalf. The idea being, if you're allowed to say out loud, as I've had copywriters do and the rest, I want to own my own agency one day, and I want to have my own clients, and I want to use this experience to be able to learn how to do that. Fantastic. Come in. That gives me an understanding of how you value the time here. Now we're working off the same page. If what you want and what I want are in alignment, it brings a richness to the communication. The other thing is, the development plans. I used to write them for my team, and the heads of each department would. And now, instead, we have them write them for themselves, and then we work on them together instead. So rather than having that dreaded annual or biannual meeting where you come in and it's like, well, you did these 3 things right, and now I'm going to blast the hell out of you on all the things that I didn't think you did well. Instead, now it's, let me come in, and at the very beginning, we're going to sit down at about 6 months, and we're going to write your personal development plan. And it's going to be, what are the things that excite you the most? What are the things that you hate the most? Where are you trying to go? How are you going to, value it? If you were to have the greatest year ever, how would, what would happen? And in doing that, what we really get is kind of a research into our own team, right? And this is what's important to them, and what they get excited about, and what they dislike about their job. And in doing that, it gives them a better experience, which, oddly enough, results in a nice culture because everybody is valuing the same thing. And so even while it has become significantly harder to maintain culture, I would say, for most companies, because they are working remotely, when you have that foundation, at least everybody is swinging from the same place in the same direction. And I have found that to be tremendous. So there have been amazing people in every discipline that I have had the privilege of working with. But I think the teams that have come through WMH have been the most satisfying because the folks that were here were able to be so open about what it was that they wanted to do and who they wanted to be and so forth. And that has proven to be extremely positive in a number of ways.
Bill, I love that. And how do you give direction to that person to, hey, go out, come up with a development plan, a personal plan? What do you give them direction on where to go with that?
Yeah, it's a structured document. I think the blank page is a little too big on that one, right? What do you want to be when you grow up, right? All of us struggle. Hell, I don't think I could answer that question. So I think at the end of the day, it's much more about saying, let's talk about the things you like. Let's talk about the things you don't like. If you were going to set 3 goals for this year that you feel would help you get to a better place in your career, what would they be? If you were going to say, this is the year that I called my mom and said, I had the best year ever, what would that be? Would it be an award that you won? Would it be an account that you had? Would it be a level that you rose to? Would it be a financial thing that you achieved? Like, how would you define that? And by asking them to give up some of that insight, it's kind of a breath of fresh air, right? And I think that's what's been good about that kind of an approach, is that they're able to say, hey, how does, instead of just trying to like reverse engineer how or why we're doing something so that ultimately they can have their own agency, for an example. Instead, it's an open conversation where it's, hey, why did you think of this? How did you think of this? How is this relevant to what you were trying to build? How could I do something like that similarly, or begin to learn that same skill set? If that's what's really important to them as a part of this journey, they have a front row seat to ask those questions. I don't see a reason in the world to try and hide it. There's much, much more room out there for all of us to play than there is a reason to protect it. I don't think anybody's going to come, swinging around, yanking clients away, or, and even if they did, there's plenty in the pool. Like, there's no reason in the world to get upset about it. So
talk about the hiring process, right? Because you were saying you look for really personal values. How is that baked into the hiring process?
to see Fight Club? Everybody stands on the porch for 3 days. No,
you put them in the basement.
That's right. We put them in the basement.
Duke it out.
Shave their heads. No, I don't think that it's so unusual, except that we don't start with the question about, tell me about your history and what did you hate about your last job? Like, I don't ask any of that. I ask them, what are you trying to achieve? What do you want? Start there. Tell me what you want. Like when you close your eyes and you think, man, I will have really gotten to the place I want to go when I blank. What's in the blank? And then let's begin there. Did you feel at your last job like you were getting there? If so, tell me how. If no, if that was the reason that you left, tell me why. Like, what was the thing you were bumping into that wouldn't let you get to the place you were trying to go? And in understanding that, again, just like a focus group, what they're really sharing is, I don't like this kind of conflict, or I don't want somebody to box me in just this way, or what have you. And it really begins to give both parties a nice vocabulary for understanding what's important to one another and being able to talk about it as it's relevant to them, which is, of course, what everybody cares about, right? You care about the 10 feet in front of you. If you didn't feel like this would be good podcast, fodder, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Everybody does that. So instead of trying to hide it or ignore it, why not embrace it and say, where are you going and what do you need? And that way we can all be at least making sure that we're reinforcing it. If it's completely opposite, then that's a whole new ballgame. I've had people come in and sit down and be like, God, I got to get out of my job. And I'm like, okay, you're not ready for this yet. Because what I'm going to ask you to do is be highly accountable to what you say you want to achieve. That's the quid pro quo. You get to openly admit what it is, but then I expect you to give 110% towards that goal so that we have something to measure at the end of the day. If you're running from something, you're not ready to be running towards something because you haven't figured out what you're trying to get to. So I have found that to be a little dangerous and potentially toxic to the rest of the team, because they're not coming in saying, hey, this is what I'm really good at, and here's how I can be positive, a positive influence with the thing I'm trying to get under my belt. Who can I align with in the team that already maybe knows more about that than I do? And who can I be sharing it with that maybe I know more than they do about it?
Yeah. And, before we hit record, we were joking around that if you're looking to start an agency, you should run. Okay.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
I think the digital influence has been so profound, and you have to marry that with the economic misperception that you can continuously buy growth, in the sense of, I'm going to buy another digital avenue. I'm going to buy this thing. Like, it has become so top heavy, buy my way to success, that it's stopped. Like, there's no reasoning in it anymore. And I'll give you a great example. We've had 2 clients this year alone that were actually spending more money in their outreach efforts because they had become so convinced that the outreach effort would ultimately yield results that they were actually upside down. Just, they were spending $15 to earn 10. And I'm seeing this happen more and more and more. And I believe it to be a result of a desire on one side. Well, it's multifaceted, but in its simplest form, a desire on one side to have trackability and accountability, right? I bought this, I got X number for it, I'm able to track who did it or used it, whatever. And that gives this very false sense of security on that side. Number 2 is the demand to be able to move immediately. Nobody wants to be patient for anything anymore. I'm not entirely sure how that's come, except by way of the digital thing being like, well, you can have it right now and it doesn't cost a lot and you can track the hell out of it. And at the end of the day, then what it comes is, well, then I can chase every shiny object in the world because I'm going to produce 50 things anyway, right? And the answer to that is no, that's not sustainable or efficient or effective in any measure at all. If you're just banging stuff out, trying to quote unquote A/B test your way to success, chances are really, really good that you're testing mediocrity and then trying to protect the mediocre thing that performed best, which is ultimately just horrible for everybody involved. So I think a lot of this kind of comes down to a number of things that are in a perfect storm. Oh, and then of course the ever expanding media thing, right? I had a guy, I was doing a presentation at an economic development thing a couple of years ago. And I literally had a guy who like had his head on the table in his hands. He was like, TikTok, and then Facebook, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. He goes, how do I keep up? And I said, don't stop. Like, are you even thinking about who's on them? Are you even thinking about whether or not your product or service makes any sense to be on there? And he was like, well, no. And I said, right. And neither are the majority. They're like, oh my gosh, well, there's a new platform. Boy, we got to get on that because everybody else is going to be on it. And I said, let everybody else do it. I mean, not to sound like mom, but if all your friends jumped off a cliff, would you follow them? I mean, at some point, you've got to still remember that at the end of the day, it all comes down to the metrics of the company. And when you take your eye off that ball because you become so invested in the idea of I'll buy more, they've got to be out there somewhere, I'll find them. The truth is you are now tactics way before or instead, in the worst case scenario, of strategy. And at that point, you're just spending money. I mean, you might as well just burn it and just burn it out a window. It will do as much good.
People feel the need to follow these shiny objects.
You know where I used to see this was couponing. A number of years ago, I worked with Precision Tune Auto Care, phenomenal bunch of people. But somebody at HQ had gotten it in their head that they were angry about Jiffy Lube coming in and taking their oil changes. So they started racing against Jiffy Lube for oil changes. Now, I want you to really think about this for a half a second. Here's a group of people that is fully capable of competing with the dealership for doing transmission repairs, brake changes, oil, engine repair, whatever, like major, massive things on a car that cost $3 and $4 and $5 and more $100 per ticket. And they're fighting for a $30 oil change. So they're filling their bays with $30 oil changes. By the time we were working with them, we were working with Maryland and Delaware at the time, the franchise co-ops. And when we sat down with them, they were so coupon dependent that like I couldn't get them to let go of the, like it was literally a stalemate one day at our offices. And I'm standing there and I said, you don't understand, you're killing yourself. You are forcing $30 jobs to replace $300 jobs. You do not have to be a Harvard MBA to understand that this is not sustainable. You must let go. And they said, if we do, we'll lose all our customers. I said, great. None of them are loyal to you at all. They're looking for a $14 oil change. What are you going to drop down to 14? Like, you must let go. And when they finally did, we held the highest ticket average in the country for 2 years. And by a lot, we were 2x for 2 years, everybody else that was on this path, because they filled it back up with appropriate jobs that were at their business model. And so I think, what I saw then is what I'm watching happen again now. It's like instead of it being a coupon, which is of course redeemable, right? That was what everybody loved about it. I printed 1,000 coupons and I got 300 coupons back. And therefore I know my ROI or ROAS on coupon printing. In this instance, I see it the exact same way, only now there's a bajillion coupons. I can buy TikTok coupons and I can buy Facebook and I can get them all. And so like now I'm really razzed up about the idea of my coupons. And in truth, it's the same, like the scaffolding behind that picture is exactly the same.
Bill, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention this in North Carolina Tar Heel land, but it reminds me of the John Wooden quote, UCLA basketball coach, never mistake activity for achievement. And it feels like that's kind of what they were doing with oil. They're busy and they're worried they were going to get less busy, but you were guiding them towards a better, business model and strategy overall with that.
I think at the end of the day, smart quotes are allowed anywhere, regardless of which country you're in, be it Tar Heel country or not. But at the end of the day, I would have to agree with that. And I think it's been said by so many coaches and leaders over time, don't be dazzled by the movement, be dazzled by the achievement, right? And it's this, I think leadership teams are so stressed right now at the tail end of the second year. and the logistics problems and the war effort and there's constantly something sitting on the horizon right now that's a threat. And so what they're doing is they're going down to these little teeny things that they see as bite-sized and inexpensive-ish and trackable-ish, and they're taking an undue sense of security from that perception, when in fact that's not really the thing. I heard a really phenomenal economist talking about the new religion of business, and I thought it was really fascinating. This was a couple of years ago, but it was just one of those things that I tucked away. He was saying it used to be that a company would get started and then it would begin to make money, and as it made money, it would take the revenue that it made at the end of the year and it would reinvest it in innovation. And then the cycle would come back around, right? And it would gain momentum based on this thing. And then eventually it would start throwing off profit, dividend, however you want to think about it. He said, but the new religion in economics is skip the investment part, bottom line focus. And he said, and what you're watching now is companies that have squeezed themselves to the point where they can't innovate any longer. And thus the fear factor to be able to quote unquote hit their numbers has become so artificially inflated, because they're not thinking about it in terms of a long-term strategy. They're thinking about getting to the next quarter, getting to the next statement, that they've taken their eye off real growth. And I would have to say that in my experience from the front lines of marketing, I would say that I have seen way too many companies that have fallen squarely in that definition.
I love that. Bill, first of all, I have one last question. And before I ask it, I just want to thank you for sharing your journey, your advice, your stories, and people should check out wmharper.com to learn more, check out more, and just explore their beautiful website. And you have to check out the pictures there if you're listening to the audio. I just don't even want to, me talking about it doesn't do it justice. You have to go there and check it out. Last question, Bill, is mentors of yours. That could be colleagues and mentors that you learned from, or it could be personally or distant mentors, just books or resources that you've enjoyed throughout the years.
I read, and I'm a voracious reader. So I read all the time, and usually 5 or 6 books at a time. So I think the most profound impact that I've had from a book in the last couple of years was, and this is going to sound like we're on the bandwagon because it's become so hot lately, is EOS by Gino Wickman.
Mm-hmm. I've had him on the podcast.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal structure to begin. And it's like any good base, you can really build off of it. And there's a lot of room to grow. There was a book, and I'm trying to remember the title of it off the top of my head, that was all about selling to value. And it was a really interesting set of insights with respect to, stop focusing on the deliverables within a proposal set. It doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, do you care how I get you to the spot, as long as ethically and morally speaking, let's just assume that that's, A+ work. But at the end of the day, if the way that I get there is to, put a tinfoil hat on my head and sit in a room upside down, lighting candles with my feet, like, does it really matter if what we get you is something at the end of that process that achieves the thing that you want to achieve? And I think it's really interesting. I have this argument with people all the time. I think it's funny how leadership teams want to be able to control marketing. Nowhere else in their world do they do this. They will go to a mechanic and not tell their mechanic how to do stuff. They'll have somebody come into their house and lay cable, and they won't tell them how to do their job. Or they'll go to a restaurant and ingest food and never once ask a question about how it was prepared or why. But somehow when they get involved in marketing, they suddenly feel like everybody's an expert. And I always say, this is like me telling my dentist how to drill my tooth. You are not qualified to tell me how to do this job. What you want instead is me to get you from here to there. So please stop mucking it up and let us actually do the thing that we're trained to do. But I think it's really funny that has become such a big thing. Deep Dive is another book that I really enjoyed. Super interesting insights on how leadership teams are vulnerable with respect to the education that they receive out of MBA programs and their experiences. Phenomenal book there. I don't know, I could probably send you a list more than I could think of them, because there are so many that I have a tendency to be like, oh yeah, and I grabbed this one thing from here and this one thing from there. And so I hope that that's at least a good place to start.
I love it. Bill, I want to be the first one to thank you. Check out wmharper.com. Check out more episodes of the podcast. And thanks, Bill. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.